Welcome to a show where you will hear about how our liberty is being eroded by the very people that swear an oath to protect it.
Today, the president signed a big new anti-terrorism bill that would expand the government's ability to track down terrorists, but at some cost.
On this show, we will discuss many of the lies that the government that hates us, by the way, we will discuss the lies that the people in positions of power and influence spread every day.
And what is the best way to confuse children? Confuse them about their sexuality, confuse them about their gender, expose them to things that their little brains are not ready for yet. That is how they are confusing children. It is leading to chaos, and Big Daddy government, of course, can be there to pick us all up and take care of us at the end of it.
We will also talk about how current elected leadership at all levels of government has been corrupted by power and control, as well as discuss the types of leadership needed to correct our republic's course.
We the people. Well, it's time to remember that we the people are the government.
Providing assistance for the Ukrainians to defeat the Russians, that's the number one priority for the United States right now.
I am your host, Larry Linton, retired U.S. Navy Command Master Chief and prior Tennessee House of Representatives District 12 candidate, and welcome to the Liberty, Leadership, and Lies podcast. Welcome to this week's show, ladies and gentlemen. Coming to you from the very hot and very dry Carlsbad, New Mexico this week, folks. Before we get started, I have to let you know that this week's show is going to be a little bit shorter than normal. I'm working a lot of logistical items, which includes my schedule, that have limited the time I've been able to research and put together this episode. I'm working to have those issues ironed out before the weekend is over so I can bring you a full half-hour show next Friday. Because believe me, there is no shortage of material to discuss. But limited connectivity and the time spent commuting to and from various locations out here in New Mexico is taking some getting used to. Let me tell you though, traveling here was an adventure. First, there was a delay leaving McGee-Tyson this past Sunday. Now, when I book my travel, I arrange my flight so that any layover involved is at least an hour or an hour and a half in length. That usually gives me a bit of a cushion just in case there's a delay on any leg of my scheduled flights, so I won't miss my connecting flight. I say usually because that almost wasn't the case this past Sunday. With the delay I encountered in Knoxville for the first leg of my flight, I almost didn't make my connecting flight in Dallas. By the time the plane landed and taxied to the gate at DFW, I had 13 minutes to get to my next flight to Midland, Texas. Of course, the connecting flight wasn't in the same terminal either. Once I deplaned, I had to run from the gate to catch the tram from Terminal A to Terminal B, and then run from the tram to get to my gate that was at the very end of Terminal B. By the time I got to the gate, they were already boarding the last group for the flight, but I did make it, just barely. When I landed in Midland, I got some information that was both frustrating as well as a point of pride. Frustrating because my luggage did not make the same flight. Point of pride because this old guy actually beat my luggage to the plane. It was a good thing that I had planned a short stop in Odessa to have dinner with the project manager for the contract I'm on before I headed to Carlsbad in the rental car. So after dinner with my business partner, I headed back to the airport to pick up my luggage, which came in on the next flight from Dallas. And the frustration level kicked in again. It seems the airline broke one of the wheels on my rolling suitcase. Not completely, but just enough to notice there's something off with it. So most of the regular listeners know that these engagements I'm on are usually 3-week events. That means I travel with a pretty big suitcase. 2 of them actually, because I have to have room for the required PPE, the personal protective equipment I have to wear on these locations, such as a hard hat and steel-toe safety boots. I also travel with my own 4-cup coffee pot because the coffee provided in these hotel rooms, along with the coffee makers in the rooms, they're usually garbage. So a big suitcase with a wonky wheel can be frustrating to maneuver. Add that to the fact that the airline won't replace the damaged wheel because it still functions. It's one of those dual wheel doohickeys and only one of the 2 wheels broke off, leaving it as functioning. Oh well, it is what it is. I got to Carlsbad late Sunday evening and have been at it all this week in these brutal temperatures. This hotel room isn't a suite like my previous engagements either, so no couch cushions to build a pillow fort to record in. We're back to the same quality of recording. A friend of mine back home offered to loan me some moving blankets to take with me that would also offer some sort of sound dampening. But my suitcases are already full as they are. Again, it is what it is. No sense in getting frustrated over things I can't control, right? Speaking of the brutal temperatures down here and the logistical issues, I've adjusted my schedule so that I'm doing most of my coaching with the crews that are working the night shifts. I actually overlap the crews that change over at 5:30 in the morning, spending time with the last half of the night crew shift and the first half of the day crew shift. It's a twofer for everybody involved. That is the way the work schedule will be for the first 2 weeks anyway, barring any little hiccups or modifications to the plan if the client needs me on another location during the day. But the final week will be daytime only, as the people that I will be working with are only on that shift. The first couple of days down here have me trying to adjust my body clock to accommodate that. So, on to the show. And as I promised last week, we will be discussing the indictment of President Trump for the events of January 6th. When you examine that indictment, a few things should stick out like a sore thumb right away. The charges brought by the disgruntled former employee at the behest of the usurper-in-chief amount to this: the criminalization of free speech. But something else should be readily apparent because it is missing from the indictment. The head of the Biden crime family and his attack dog did not charge President Trump with sedition, or conspiracy of sedition, or insurrection, or rebellion, or any of that. Interesting, isn't it? Let's go over the sections of the United States Code that the commies and their willing allies in the media have been breathlessly waiting for Donald Trump to be charged with, but wasn't. They are 18 United States Code 2384, seditious conspiracy. The elements of that code are as follows. If two or more persons in any state or territory, or in any place subject to the jurisdiction of the United States, conspire to overthrow, put down, or to destroy by force the government of the United States, or to levy war against them, or to oppose by force the authority thereof, or by force to prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, or by force to seize, take, or possess any property of the United States contrary to the authority thereof, they shall each be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 20 years, or both. Now, every news media outlet, yes, even including Fox News, said that President Trump's conviction under that statute was a foregone conclusion. A slam dunk is what they frequently called it. Yet that statute is completely missing in Jack Smith's indictment. Things that make you go, right? Well, not really. If you are capable of any type of critical thinking, you know why it wasn't in that indictment. Because it never happened. Also missing is this, 18 United States Code Section 2383, rebellion or insurrection. The particular elements of that code are as follows. Whoever incites, sets on foot, assists, or engages in any rebellion or insurrection against the authority of the United States or the laws thereof, or gives aid or comfort thereto, shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both, and shall be incapable of holding any office under the United States. Now that one is the one the commies were really hoping for because of that final sentence. But again, he was not charged with it. And we talked about this in an episode last year or even earlier than that because of that aid and comfort. You know, the Speaker of the House, in denying protection from the National Guard or the U.S. Army, provided aid and comfort to the insurrection. So anyway, he wasn't charged with that. But keep in mind that President Trump's second impeachment by the communists and trans-publicans in the House of Representatives, they charged him with inciting an insurrection, a charge which the Senate did not find him guilty of. Now, because that was a purely political process, double jeopardy is not attached to this current election interference indictment. Again, read between the lines. Why wasn't he indicted for that? Because it'll bring down the whole house of commie cards that was in the House of Representatives. But let's go over the specific charges listed in Jack Smith's indictment. They are Count 1, United States Code, Section 371, conspiracy to defraud the United States. And that says if two or more persons conspire either to commit any offense against the United States or to defraud the United States or any agency thereof in any manner or for any purpose, and one or more of such persons do any act to affect the object of the conspiracy, each shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 5 years, or both. If, however, the offense the commission of which is the object of the conspiracy is a misdemeanor only, the punishment for such conspiracy shall not exceed the maximum punishment provided for such misdemeanor. Continue on with Count 2, that's 18 United States Code Section 1512, subparagraph K, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding. That states whoever conspires to commit any offense under this section shall be subject to the same penalties as those prescribed for the offense the commission of which was the object of the conspiracy. Moving on to Count 3, is 18 United States Code Section 1512, subparagraphs C2, obstruction of and attempt to obstruct an official proceeding. And that states whoever corruptly otherwise obstructs, influences, or impedes any official proceeding or attempts to do so. And then we get down to the final count, Count 4, 18 United States Code Section 241, conspiracy against rights. And that states that if two or more persons conspire to injure, oppress, threaten, or intimidate any person in any state, territory, commonwealth, possession, or district in the free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege secured to him by the Constitution or laws of the United States, or because of his having so exercised the same, or if two or more persons go in disguise on the highway or on the premises of another with the intent to prevent or hinder his free exercise or enjoyment of any right or privilege so secured, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned not more than 10 years, or both. And if death results from the acts committed in violation of this section, or if such acts include kidnapping or an attempt to kidnap, aggravated sexual abuse or an attempt to commit aggravated sexual abuse, or an attempt to kill, they shall be fined under this title or imprisoned for any term of years, or for life, or both, or may be sentenced to death. Now that's a whole lot of gobbledygook there, but none of which the former president engaged in. Reading through the indictment, each count has at its foundation that President Trump, quote, used knowingly false claims of election fraud, unquote, or words similar to that effect in his violation of those codes. Earlier in the indictment, though, there's this interesting sentence. Let me read it to you. Quote, the defendant had a right, like every American, to speak publicly about the election and to even claim falsely that there had been outcome determinative fraud during the election and that he won, unquote. So that's right there in the opening of the indictment. So which is it here, ladies and gentlemen? Is it that every American has the right to speak publicly about the election and even to claim falsely that there was fraud? Or, like this indictment is saying, every American except Donald Trump has that right? After reading through the indictment, it is plainly clear that the current resident of the White House, the foreign agent with a brain pan full of rotting oatmeal, who is in that position only because of election fraud, he and his handlers are clearly threatened by the former occupant of the White House and his impending victory in the 2024 presidential election. I say that knowing there will once again be widespread election fraud, especially in Georgia, Michigan, Arizona, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. But now that fraud will have to reach unprecedented and blatantly obvious levels for the commies to maintain power. The usurpers know that. They know that during this go-around, millions more Americans will be closely watching what is happening at the polling locations, closely watching the vote count, And they have spent the past few years, without the assistance of the Republican Party and the millions of dollars that was donated to them in order to combat election fraud, they have spent the past few years cleaning up the voting rolls and getting legislation passed to make it harder to cheat. Also, this time around, the commies cannot rely on a pandemic to aid them in their ballot box stuffing. Another problem that the commie cabal in D.C., including Jack Smith and the useful idiots in the media, have to deal with is the latest news out of Michigan with regards to election fraud. Now, there's news out of Muskegon, Michigan, that pretty much bolsters President Trump's claims about fraud in the election. This past Tuesday, a blockbuster report in the Gateway Pundit detailed significant 2020 voter fraud in that small county of Michigan. The most disturbing aspect about this story isn't about the election fraud, though, ladies and gentlemen. A plurality of Americans right now, and this includes Republicans, Independents, and Democrats altogether, they know that election fraud significantly affected the outcome of the 2020 presidential election. You know, the usurpers are aware of that polling, too, which is playing a significant role in this political persecution of Donald Trump. Anyway, the most disturbing aspect of this story is the timing. The investigation of this fraud took place almost a full month before the 2020 election, and the country is only hearing about it now, almost 3 years after the fact. Meaning this investigation had been buried by the ruling elite, their investigators, and of course, the mainstream media. Credit goes out to a lot of people involved in bringing this news to us, such as Jim Hoft, Ben Wetmore, and Patty McMurray of the Gateway Pundit, and to Phil O'Halloran, Lori Skibo, and Kanoka the Great. But the story goes as follows. On October 8th, 2020, a mere month before the 2020 general election, a Muskegon, Michigan city clerk noticed a person, whose name was later redacted from the police report, that was dropping off between 8,000 to 10,000 completed voter registration applications at the city clerk's office. One person dropped off that many. The city clerk noticed that the numerous stacks of registrations included the same handwriting, or had non-existent addresses, or incorrect phone numbers. Now, the Muskegon Police Department was contacted, and they were asked to investigate. On the 21st of October, First Lieutenant Mike Anderson was contacted by Tom Fabus, Chief of Investigations for Michigan Attorney General Dana Nessel's office. According to the Michigan State Police report, Fabus asked for Michigan State Police assistance with a joint investigation of alleged voter fraud that was being conducted by the Muskegon Police Department and the Attorney General. Now, this led to an investigative task force being formed, and the investigation was started. During the course of the investigation, the Michigan State Police discovered the woman worked for GBI Strategies. It's an interesting company, folks. Go ahead and look it up. See what political party that company has ties to. See what states they are involved in. Now, the state police, they included that information in their report about GBI Strategies. That company had temporary offices in numerous Michigan locations. The police also identified one Mr. Gary Bell as the head of the organization. Another interesting cat. Go ahead and Google him. Look him up. When the police inspected the GBI Strategies office near Muskegon, they found some odd items. Very odd for what should be just an office setting. The items they found included semi-automatic guns, silencers and suppressors, burner phones. Burner phones? Aren't they just usually used in criminal activity? You bet they are. And then they found a bag of prepaid cash cards. Gee, I wonder what they were doing. Maybe some vote buying? And a bunch of incomplete voter registrations. Get this. There were never any arrests. Of course. Guess what happened next in the investigation? You'll never believe it. They turned it over to the FBI. Oh. And just like every other voter fraud investigation from the 2020 election, that was where it went to die. Remember, in November 2020, Bill Barr appointed a notorious DOJ attorney who covered up voter fraud crimes. There's always been some unanswered statistical irregularities about absentee ballots from the 2020 election all across the country. And not just the ballots. These irregularities are suggestive of massive, systemic voter fraud among absentee ballots. Viewing the percentage of the vote each candidate won from absentee voters precinct by precinct, there is a very suspicious correlation between the candidates in 2020 that does not exist in 2016. This suggests there was major electronic manipulation of votes combined with the physical ballots placed to back up those fraudulent votes. There is no argument that Michigan's Secretary of State Jocelyn Benson, a tried and true communist, mailed out absentee ballot requests without a legal request on file to every voter in the state. There's also no argument that Benson then used illegal interpretations of the law regarding matching signatures on the ballots to those on file. The communists all over the country, they used the scamdemic as a pretext, and they set the stage for scores of absentee ballots that would never receive scrutiny as to whether they were valid or not. Michigan State Senator and former Secretary of State Ruth Johnson is quoted as saying, "My estimate is over 800,000 ballot applications were sent to non-qualified voters in Michigan, including many individuals who moved or died, and even some individuals who are underage or non-citizens. Many were sent to people who had moved out of state." Now, the rotting bag of oatmeal for brains, Joe Biden, he won Michigan by just over 154,000 votes, which is kind of surprising seeing how the communists had an 800,000 ballot applications cushion. Like I mentioned earlier, though, this news report has implication for Jack Smith's indictment against President Trump. The foundation to each of their charges, remember we discussed this, is that President Trump knowingly lied about voter fraud. It's not really the case, though, is it? Actual voter fraud was being investigated a month before the 2020 election. Massive voter fraud. That investigation apparently ended up in the circular file because the deep state could not stand for Donald Trump's re-election. What happened in Muskegon, Michigan is just a small sampling of what happened all over the country, where commie governors bent or broke the rules on voting because of the COVID lies. If people are going to be jailed for lying to the public, I know a whole pool of people that lied to us about COVID, especially those in government. I'm sure there will be more to come on this indictment, as well as the one that is expected to be coming out of Georgia soon. I think what's beautiful about this indictment out of D.C. from Jack Smith is that now President Trump finally gets to litigate in court the voter fraud that occurred across the nation. His lawyers now have discovery in all of those states. We'll see what happens, though. And there's also more news that came out earlier this week about how the usurpers, in their zeal to prosecute, really persecute, their political enemies, will violate not only their oaths to the Constitution, but the Constitution itself. Foreign agent and crime family head Joe Biden's attack dog, Jack Smith, demanded that Twitter turn over Donald Trump's direct messages to them. Now, this is a clear violation of his First Amendment rights. Not to mention violating the Stored Communications Act or even executive privilege. Because Twitter did not comply with Jack Smith's order fast enough, the corrupt Department of Justice fined Elon Musk company $350,000. It wasn't fast enough for Jack Smith because Twitter resisted turning these messages over without having the constitutionality of the order verified. You see, the court ordered Twitter to turn over the direct message in Donald Trump's account was accompanied by a non-disclosure order that prohibited them from notifying anyone about the existence or contents of the warrant. Shady, 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 ladies and gentlemen. But of course, not surprising. 81 million votes that selects a dictator leaves the citizens with, a dictator, using banana republic tactics to silence his political opponents, to get his political opponents locked away to secure his reelection. Pay attention to what is going on with our government, folks, like your life depends on it, because it actually does. And folks, that's it for this week. In closing, we have this week's wisdom from God's Word, and today it comes to us from Proverbs 20, 23 to 25. Here are some further sayings of the wise. It is wrong to show favoritism when passing judgment. A judge who says to the wicked, "You are innocent," will be cursed by many people and denounced by the nations. But it will go well for those who convict the guilty. Rich blessings will be showered on them. Many people right now are waking up to the fact that our government has weaponized itself against the citizens. Those that aren't awake yet need to be woken up by those of us that are. All of this is being done to protect the ruling elite so they can stay in power, where they use their power to rob us of our liberty and our sweat equity. They have officially thrown the First Amendment under the bus with this Donald Trump indictment, as well as their warrant to Twitter. The case in D.C. against Donald Trump is the pure and simple criminalization of free speech. They have worked to criminalize the speech of parents showing up at school board meetings. They have criminalized memes and robbed a person of their liberty through their fake courts. They have hidden evidence of their criminality in the electoral process, much as they are trying to hide the crimes of Biden and the rest of his family. If we are steadfast and we take a stand in the arena in the defense of the rule of law and our Constitution, we can reap the blessings of liberty that is a gift from our Creator. The time for being timid and compliant is over. The time for righteousness is upon every citizen in our republic. Once again, thank you all for listening this week, and I pray that you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Until next week, stand in the arena with me, Reveille. It's time to wake up.